Hi, I'm Mark Risch Jr., partner at Prodigy Search. As part of our Prodigy Search Presents interview series, we're speaking with a few members of our Diversity and Inclusion Board of Advisors, as they play a major role advocating for change within their own organizations and the sports and entertainment industries as well. Our goal with this mini-series is to continue to educate and provide guidance to the sports and entertainment leaders out there, as our D&I board members share valuable insights and best practices. We kicked off this interview series last year with 4 members of our previous board of advisors and wanted to continue this conversation with 4 brand new members, with Tim Wise being one of our new advisors to join us this year. And so, Tim, I want to introduce you and your background. And before we get into the Q&A, maybe give the listeners a little bit of an understanding of who you are. Currently the Senior Associate Athletic Director for Facilities, Events, and Revenue at the University of Notre Dame. And last time we spoke with Tim was in mid-2020, I think it was the summer of 2020, where you were at the University of Miami. Spent nearly 10 years there, I think, right? Just shy of the decade mark with the U. And when we interviewed Tim at that time, the focus was on the college landscape and how his role had changed and evolved during COVID. This conversation today will take a little bit of a different spin, obviously with a D&I focus, but prior to the U, you spent time at Wisconsin, UConn, and I think in total, so I'm gonna age you, but I have more grades than you do, but bringing nearly, I think, 25 years of experience in the college world. So ton of knowledge to share today, and really appreciate your time. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. I'm excited to be here.
So in February of 2017, and we covered MOA a little bit on our interview from 2 years ago, but just to bring people up to speed, obviously you were named to the MOA board of Directors in 2017. 2019, I think you were named to the executive committee, and then this past June of 2021, appointed the second vice president. Can you talk about MOA's evolution and their growth over the years, and how things changed for the better with MOA? I'm always curious about, your take on MOA's history, how things have changed, but then where MOA can go. And I'll reiterate those questions as we kind of go, but talk about MOA.
Sure, thanks, Mark. Great start-off question. Well, MOA is an organization that's very near and dear to me, particularly based on what it represents from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. But as you look at the evolution of MOA, we're 22 years old. We started out, 22 years ago with a group of folks who just felt like they needed a space for minority and diversity issues in the collegiate athletic space, collegiate athletic world. And so a group of people got together and formulated this group. And so back then, it didn't have a lot of membership, probably only several hundred, and it was also a separate group by itself. And then over time, as we grew momentum and we started to kind of really grow into who we are today and where we could be in the future, we started to see our membership increase drastically. But then also one of the big changes that came for us a few years back was that we came underneath the umbrella of NACDA, which is obviously the National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics. And so coming underneath that umbrella, it brought us in line with all the other affiliate groups that belong to NACDA, but that also serve in the collegiate athletic space, whether that be NAD, SEFMA, and some of the other groups that work with NACDA in the collegiate athletic space. So again, as we've evolved over time, obviously we've gone from, really being this young and new group to this now a little bit older, more mature, but definitely with a more active voice and participation in the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And just when I look at how we've evolved, right now we currently have over 1,000 memberships. I don't know that anyone thought 22 years ago that we would get there, but obviously in the last couple of years we felt like we could get there, particularly with Ed Scott's leadership. He's our current president. He's at the University of Virginia now, but he made it a goal for us on the board that we needed to eclipse that 1,000 membership number, and we did it, thankfully, this year. So we're excited about that aspect of what we do, but then also just being an advocacy group and a voice for minorities in the space. And it really doesn't matter where the space is. If you're in an athletic space, then we feel like we represent you, whether that's on the NCAA level, the NAIA level, the junior college level. We feel like we have a voice for you to be able to represent you and your interests and what happens from that perspective. But as I look at us now, and I look at our symposium and what we do with NACDA and how we bring our membership together, I believe currently we have over 250 people registered, which is, I believe, is a record number for us registered for the symposium. So we're actually doing a 22-year celebration out at NACDA this year. We were supposed to do the 20th anniversary, but obviously because of COVID, we were not able to do that. So we're going to do a 22-year celebration on Saturday night, which is the start of NACDA, so the night before NACDA starts. So we'll be there, kind of that solo group there by ourselves, but we're welcoming any and all affiliate members to come and participate in that at the Mandalay Bay. But again, as I look at how we've evolved and I look at, like our awards committee and the number of scholarships and the professional development grants that we give to our members to be able to either support their professional development endeavors or come to a conference. Also, we do a Rudy Keeling postgraduate scholarship to help members fund their postgraduate education. When I look at our education committee and this, the webinars that they put on throughout the year and working with the symposium committee to get the symposium together, or if I look at our external relations committee and you see the number of tweets and you see the number of things out on social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of those things didn't exist 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So now seeing those type things, is very great and beneficial for our organization, but also more importantly for our members, that they get to see the benefits of being a part of MOA. But then as we evolve in the future, obviously the last couple of years, we've seen lots of social unrest, social injustice. We've seen lots of issues around race, ethnicity, female, gender, disability, you name it. There's a number of issues, voting rights, you name it. There's a number of significant issues out there. And so we've been that group that has been championing for a lot of those individuals and organizations out there to say, hey, we're here to support you and how can we lend a hand? And obviously we do that not only just through our voice and our support, but then through our webinars that we do to say, okay, let's talk about this XYZ issue and figure out how we can help you improve what you're doing from that perspective. Or if we're talking about, okay, if there's an opportunity to get in front of minority suppliers, we created something great, which is a Minority Economic Inclusion Network. And this is where we've started to include suppliers and vendors as a part of more to say to our membership, okay, you can go to this minority supplier to get XYZ supply, vendor, things done for your campus, your work environment, whatever you do. So we've started to create a lot of those type things that will benefit our membership, not only now, but sustain us for the future from that perspective. Then I just think as we look at the changing landscape of college athletics and what it means to be a minority and to have diversity, equity, and inclusion, we really want to make sure that we have a seat at the table to make sure that we have representation when we look at the collegiate space and make sure that we have representation at the table, but then also that person has the authority and the resources to be successful in their role.
I love how you framed a few different things during that conversation. 22 years, long time, obviously. So happy anniversary. It's got as nice of a sounding ring to it than 20s. That's fine. No worries. The growth of the membership, tremendous. The partnership with NACDA, amazing. But a lot of things you said there in between some of those accomplishments and the growth you've had on social and the awareness and kind of the brand that MOA has now, maybe didn't have 20, or 21, 22 years ago. The seat at the table was a big takeaway for me. I think the networking opportunities through your event, again, which starts with this, starts with the first day. But then the third piece, I think people don't talk enough. Again, hiring and inclusion and belonging once people are hired by an organization. The supplier and the vendor piece of it, I think, is such an under discussed part of this whole conversation for businesses in our industry, right? Where you can just do better, right? With working with diverse suppliers and vendors, and having them at least be part of an RFP process. If they don't win a bid or they're not part of it, they're not chosen, that's fine. Give them the opportunity. That often doesn't get talked about because we focus so much on hiring and the other things that are, again, we need to catch up on other areas. But the vendor and supplier piece, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll find if you worked on a college campus somewhere, and even probably for corporate America, you found that, they have minority, requirements when it comes to suppliers and vendors from that perspective. And so what we found was that we found a lot of our membership, they were having challenges finding those minority vendors I mean, obviously, being in the facilities world, I'm definitely familiar with the supplier vendor mechanisms and what that meant from that perspective. But sometimes most times the other members were not familiar with that. So we felt like it was important to get that together for our membership. So Stan Johnson, our executive director, he actually came out with the ideal. And so we worked with him to get this mean, we call it mean, MEIN, together from that perspective. But just the outpouring of support that we've gotten, not only from the vendors, but our members, has been great. So it's just another resource that our membership has that they can tap into when they need something.
That's great. One of the other positions you've held over the years, and obviously the put Mo aside for just one second, the NCAA Minority Opportunities and Interest Committee, 3 years as vice chair. Just briefly, the goals and objectives of that committee with the NCAA?
Yeah, certainly. Back in my heyday, as I said, as I say, I'm a little bit older now, but obviously they have a slightly different mission. Obviously, I think we both organizations are championing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and being a voice for those in that space. But obviously, with the MOIC, it falls underneath the realm of the NCAA,
right.
So that lends itself to manage differently in terms of really they can work on legislation and some of those type things where we cannot do that in MOA. Now, however, we can in MOA have people on our committees that work with those separate groups to get legislation. But again, it being under the NCAA, they can, push forward legislation and some of those type things. And when I was a part of the group, we really focused on programming and opportunities for minorities in the space of collegiate athletics to give them we like to call it extra training or extra visibility. Again, I went through the Leadership Institute for Ethnic Minority Males back in the day. They also have something that was called the Fellows Program that's now called the Pathway Programs. They had internships for minorities. And then also we would work with the CWA to select the NCAA Woman of the Year from that process. So back then, that was kind of our challenge when I was on the committee.
That's great. I want to stay on the topic of college athletics, right? I mean, given your background, your knowledge of it, and it's I know maybe I'm putting you in a tough spot with this question, but it's worth the dialogue because I don't know the answer to it. When you look at purely hiring and promoting women and people of color, right? Just for the purpose of this first question, where do you think college athletics is? Are they ahead or behind professional sports in terms of their DEI efforts, just centered on hiring and promoting? Do you have a sense of that, even just because you have a million friends out there outside of college athletics and pro sports? So you pay attention, right? Where do you think they are, ahead or behind?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mark. And I've thought about it a lot, and I think I'll answer it this way. It really depends on the league and the sport that you look at or you're observing or comparing to. Obviously, I think when you look at the NBA, I think the NBA has done a fantastic job. I was recently reading an article and a caption of the number of minority head coaches in the NBA. So I think from that perspective, they've done a great job. But then when you look at the NFL and you look at the number of minority head coaches, I mean, there's less than a handful. So again, I'll say, it really depends on the sport that you're looking at from that perspective. I think certainly college athletics has gotten better than what it used to be 20 years ago. I just don't know that we are where we should be. Obviously, when you look at the professional leagues, they're billion-dollar sports industries there. And so when you talk about money, you always cringe or caution because owners feel like, they need to have some type of special person or unique person in a head coaching position versus someone who really can do the job and handle the job, and they're appeasing to a different audience versus college athletics. Obviously, you have student athletes and you do have donors and you have those type of people that you're trying to acquiesce to from that perspective. So sometimes you just have to look at it in a different lens to be able to quantify whether or not that's successful or if you're ahead or behind from that perspective. But again, when I look at the NBA, obviously they're ahead of the game from my perspective. NFL definitely is not. College athletics, there's lots of changing dynamics over the last couple of years. I think that's probably moving the needle a little bit ahead, I would say, of the NFL from that perspective, particularly with a lot of the social injustice and some of the coaches and the high-profile student athletes who started to be very vocal about, hiring of head coaches, hiring of minority coordinators, those type things. Sure. So I definitely think college athletics is certainly ahead from that perspective.
What about, and just take it a step further, what about the differences you may see, even on the peripheral, in terms of beyond hiring and promoting, but focusing on resources and accessibility and initiatives and you mentioned training, right? Skill set development. Do you notice any differences as well on that between colleges and pro in terms of the non-hiring and promoting side, but everything else, the resources, accessibility, et cetera?
Sure, and in this day and age, it's always about the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, yeah,
From that
yeah,
perspective, if you're a collegiate program that has a very comprehensive, I'll say, football, men's basketball, baseball type program, and you're generating a lot of revenue, then you're probably going to have a lot more resources than some of those under-resourced or underfunded universities or colleges that are out there. So there's definitely a disparity of the have and have-nots. I mean, I think when you look at the Power Five and the autonomy schools and the amount of authority and the funding that they have versus the Group of Five or then the AAA schools, which are the non-football playing schools. So when you look at those type of universities, the resources are very disparaging from one to the other one. And again, obviously, if you're in the haves and you rake in all of the revenue from a football or men's basketball, women's basketball, ice hockey, or baseball, then it lends itself that you will have more resources from that perspective. But at the end of the day, I just feel like we all have to make a commitment to a certain level that we have to support diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and provide the training and the resources and the things that not only the student athletes needs, but the staff that needs to support the student athletes to be successful.
yeah.
And so you've got to be able to address that issue across the board, no matter what level you are. You're going to get left behind.
It's fascinating. So I think that what you said there at the very end is something we've experienced when we've worked on a few different senior D&I searches. So I might be going back to your first answer about hiring, but it really ties into what you just said about resources and money. When we've placed people with the Denver Broncos, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the SeatGeek that have been in senior DEI roles, the candidates and the ones we've placed, but also the other candidates we talked about resources, staffing, money, et cetera, to build things out, right? And that's on the pro side, and organizations and SeatGeek, a ticketing provider that also has some funds to spend, but making sure that it's not setting that person up for failure either. So making sure they are given the staff, the money, the resources, and the support once they're there. So great answer. And you're right, there is a difference between those programs that are generating 7, 8, 9 figures and those that are clearly in a deficit. So where can they put other dollars towards it? Sometimes a scenario that might not get all the dollars. So
absolutely, you have to make a decision of kind of what's important to you and what do you value at the end of the day. And and I firmly believe most ADs want to do the right thing, but sometimes they just have to make tough decisions, and you have to make a decision on how you want to allocate your resources.
Tim, I want to ask you a question about, and you mentioned especially the evolution of things over the last few years in particular, and obviously you and I chatted during the summer of 2020. So I'm asking this question in a more broad sense because you've mentioned you've come in your career. You've been around for a while. Those are your words, not mine. But do you see younger professionals in college athletics being more active, more vocal on DEI issues than maybe they once were when you were coming up in the industry back in your UConn days and et cetera? Do you notice that that group of either entry level or mid-level people in college athletics are more involved and are more outspoken on DEI issues?
Well, I'll say it this way. I've certainly seen an uptick in our student athlete population that has become more engaged and vocal when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's just natural based on some of the things that they're experiencing either on their college campus or in their community. So I've definitely seen an uptick in that. In terms of the staff or the young professionals, I've seen a little bit of it. I haven't seen a large uptick of it. I will say, I think the new age folks, they speak differently and they vocalize differently, where before I think we had to pound the table and jump on the table. They're kind of quiet with theirs, either in their social media efforts or in some of their campaigns with their student athletes or some of their NLI initiatives and some of the other things that they do from a community service perspective. So I certainly think there's an increase there. I just think it's probably not being either vocalized or either visualized in the way that we typically would see that type of outspoken person in terms of being at the microphone and pounding on tables and doing some other things. I think they're doing it in a quiet way, based on some of my observations. But obviously, when it comes to MOA and MOIC and some of those other organizations, we definitely see lots of representation. Again, based on our membership growing to over 1,000, that's telling me that there's lots of folks who feel very passionate about what we do and what we bring to the table and want to be a part of the solution and help us move to the next level.
Sure. And I love part of your answer there about the student athlete piece. I hadn't considered that, and that's different now than it ever was before in terms of their power, their influence, their own brand, obviously, but how they can use their name and brand to make change and to stand up for themselves. And we saw that, with March Madness last year on the women's side, or the year prior, on the women's side, and it's certainly come up in other areas as well. So student athlete, great thought. I hadn't really considered that. But last question on my side, and this is, again, it's a question that you and I've never really talked about before, but the idea of a mentor or somebody that you admire, or plural, it could be more than one here, but whether it's a certain AD or maybe a mentor or two, that people, that you look towards, that people, I didn't know Tim, tries to follow in that person's footsteps, or they go to them for guidance and advice. Who do you look towards as somebody you aspire to do what they've done in their career, or just in general, you go to them for advice and tips on career, life, etc.?
Sure, that's a good question. And, over the course of my career, I've had a lot of great people and great friends and colleagues and mentors in my life, but there's several that have definitely made a lasting impact on me. The first one is Veronica Conway. She was assistant sports information director when I was a student at the University of South Carolina, so she probably doesn't like me saying that, dating herself, but she has just always been a great friend, and she was always a friend foremost, and she was the one who encouraged me to get in this industry, to get into facilities and operations, and saw something in me that I did not see at the time. She's no longer in the industry, but she's still a good friend, and her and I talk all the time because she was in the business, she knows what it's about, but she can give that outside perspective because she's no longer in the industry, but she's just been a great friend. And then the other one is Vaughn Williams. I worked for Vaughn for several years when I was at UConn, and he's just become a great friend and a great mentor, and someone that I can just pick up the phone and just have a conversation about life in general. And, I know his wife and his kids and his family, and always enjoy being around them. But again, when I have a life moment, I can call him. When I have a work moment, I can call him.
Yeah.
He's just been great from that perspective. And then another one is Sean Frazier, who's the AD at Northern Illinois now. I worked for Sean when I was at Wisconsin, but Sean and I developed a friendship when I was at the University of Denver, and I believe he was at Merrimack, but we're both hockey schools, and he needed someone to help him around in Denver when they were out there playing University of Denver in a hockey tournament, and someone said, hey, reach out to Tim Wise. And that was almost 20 years ago. Matter of fact, it was more than 22 years. That was 22 years ago, somewhere in there. So him and I have just been great friends and colleagues. And again, someone that I can just call on if I need to pick up the phone. And one thing about Sean that he used to do for us when I was at Wisconsin, and I believe he still does it, is that he always made time to take us to lunch every month just to talk. And he's like, we don't have to talk about work. We can talk about whatever. Talk about life.
Yeah.
So it was always special for me to have that kind of that one-on-one time with him outside of the office, for us just to talk about work, life in general, from those things. And then the last one, Sean Eichhorst, who's currently the deputy AD at University of Texas. I worked with Sean when I was at Wisconsin, but then worked for Sean when I was at the University of Miami. And he's just a good friend. He will text me to this day and just check in on me and make sure I'm okay. And the one thing that he always says to me, Tim, is if they just let you do your job, they'll be so much better.
Good to have that support. Yeah,
exactly. So he's just very supportive and believes in me and who I am and what I'm about. And so to have folks like that in your corner, it's just a great feeling, and they've helped me to get to where I'm in my career today.
I love that answer, because I think the common thread I heard throughout was, again, some of them were a long time ago, some maybe, again, more recent is all relative, but some at the very beginning stage of your career. is the personal and the professional side. I think people, when they think about mentors, and some people overanalyze the mentor thing, they need to make it official. It needs to be formal. Like, no, it can be an informal thing that is infrequent. It doesn't need to be a monthly check-in. It can be via text as well. It doesn't need to be in person all the time. So I love the idea that the personal and the professional side, and as needed on both, from both. And by the way, it's reciprocal too. You may view them as a mentor, a friend, etc., but you may also be able to offer them things, and you just may not know it or identify it, but it's reciprocal, which I love.
Yeah, I always tell young folks now is to find a mentor or a colleague that can help them, but find someone that you're not going to ask about a job.
Yeah.
Find somebody who can just talk to you real talk and give you the down and dirty when you need it, because sometimes we need that. And I think sometimes if all you're ever getting is that you're doing a great job, I'm not sure that's a good mentor and a friend to you, because at the end of the day, I think we're all doing something, I don't want to say wrong, but I think we all have some areas that we can improve on and get better with. So if you have someone who's being real with you in your corner, I think you'll be much better off.
I agree wholeheartedly. Listen, I've taken up a ton of your time today. I do want to start off by thanking you for your time. I do want to give a plug, whether you like it or not. I'm going to give a plug for you. The 22nd annual Lead One Institute. It's being hosted at Notre Dame, right, this July.
Right.
Lead1association.com. Obviously, you mentioned NACDA, the event, and the MOA anniversary event coming up as well. So keep an eye out on Tim in the industry. You've been a great friend of Prodigy's for a while now. You've always offered incredible insights. You shot us straight. You've told us areas where we can improve and get better. So always appreciate your time, Tim, and continued success.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
You got it.